Hello again, welcome back to our tutorial series on literature. And if this is your first time coming across videos like this tutorial is brought to you by O3SCHOOLS JAMB app. O3SCHOOLS JAMB app is an app basically for students. It helps them make adequate preparations for examinations that they have coming up. So today we're looking at Radar of the Treasure Trove. Radar of the Treasure Trove is one of the recommended poems for UTME by JAMB. It is an African poem. It was written by a Ghanaian poet, Lade Orsolo. A Ghanaian poet wrote the poem Radar of the Treasure Trove. Then the structure of the poem is made up of 5 stanzas and 23 lines. The poem consists of 5 stanzas and 23 lines. The poem is about life, what we must do and what we must avoid if we want to live worry-free lives or peaceful lives. In stanza 1, the poem begins with a series of rhetorical questions. The poet is asking us what can be worthy of our lives and dearer than the gems of our dreams. The poet then goes on to advise that we should always be happy, regardless of the circumstances or the situations that we find ourselves in. We see this in the last line of this stanza, where the poet says, always strive to fly flags of joy. Then stanza 2. Stanza 2 is a continuation of the thought process the poet initiated at the end of stanza 1. Like after asking those rhetorical questions and advising us to always strive to fly flags of joy, the poet continues this same thought in stanza 2, still talking about us being, compassionate and showing love. The poet thinks that things like this are prerequisite, like they are needed. If you really want to live a worry-free life on earth, you need things like this. You need to show love, you need to be happy, you need to be compassionate. And fling roses wherever you pause, heaven on earth your destination. So these are the words of the poet in the second stanza. So on your way to, your destination, show love, be compassionate. These things are prerequisites. You need them to live, a worry-free life on earth. Then in the last stanza of this, in the last line, of this stanza, the poet begins another thought again. The line says, of things that will blot out that brief. And then that thought is well explained in the next stanza, which is the stanza 3 now. The poet talks more on things that could deprive us of that, blissful life that everyone wants. That peaceful, worry-free life of bliss that we all are looking for. And the poet thinks that that thing is rage. Rage will rob us of, or rage is capable of robbing us of, charity, robbing us of joy and happiness, robbing us of sweetness, robbing us of life, robbing us of all things good. Stanza 4 continues to talk on the disadvantages of rage. The stanza says, rage spreads toxic fumes and spells calamity. And then he also goes on to tell us the cause of this rage, that rage is caused by our perception of storms. We're not willing to understand or accept the perceptions of others is the cause of rage. Then in this stanza, breaking around, not upon your head, as used there, is in a line in this stanza, simply depicts the fact that it is those around that actually suffers from the rage, or they suffer more from the rage than the enraged person. In the last stanza, the poet persona opines that what we think influences our feelings. The last stanza begins with, as you think, so you feel. Watch your mind. So the poet persona is also cautioning us to watch our minds, to watch our thinking, watch our thoughts, because rage and ruin go together. Like where there's rage, ruin is never far behind. So he then also intimates us of his resolve to follow his own advice. So he's not just advising us now to like always be happy, to always strive to fly flags of joy and fling roses wherever we go. And he's also going to follow his own advice. So the boy is also going to follow his own advice, and because his destination is also heaven on earth. We see that in the last two lines of the poem. I'll fling roses wherever I bet, as my destination is heaven on earth. So that's a brief summary of Radar of the Treasure Trove, a poem about life, what we must do and what we must, avoid if we want to live peaceful lives. Now let's quickly run through the themes in the poem. The central ideas that the poet wanted to pass across to us. Love and joy. This is one of the themes in the poem. The poem talks about love and joy a lot, actually. Talked about it. And the poet persona sees this as tickets to living blissful lives. Because if you check, the poem kept making reference to heaven on earth. That means enjoyable life. So the poet persona thinks that is everybody's goal, and love and joy are like the major ingredients needed if you want to achieve that goal. Then there's also the theme of rage. Just as the poem talks about the importance and advantages of love and joy, it also talks on the disadvantages, the adverse effects that rage has on our lives. The poet thinks that a life of heaven on earth, a life of bliss, a life of happiness here on earth is very, very possible. All we have to do is cage the rage, because rage leads to ruin. Where there's rage, ruin is never far behind. So if we want to live worry-free lives, we must check our emotions, check our rage, know how we handle rage. Then brevity of life. Brevity of life, that means life is short. So according to the poem, life is a journey and your destination should be heaven on earth. So he thinks that on our way, while we are making that journey, to make it worthwhile, we should spread love, we should spread compassion, because life is short and it's a journey. Then we also have power of the mind. The last stanza, it says, as you think, so you feel. Watch your minds. The poem tells us that the mind is powerful. Our minds, our thoughts controls our emotions. So we should be mindful of what we focus on, as that can either, make or mar us. So the power of the mind is very powerful and it controls a lot of things. What we think controls our emotions, and by extension, it controls our actions. So let's be careful of our thoughts. Then some of the poetic devices used in the poem. Metaphor. Metaphor is a direct comparison. In the poem, we see rage is chief. No use of as or like, just directly, rage is chief. That's a metaphorical statement. Then rhetorical question. The poem begins with about 2 or 3 rhetorical questions. But what can be worthy of your life? You're not going to find the poet and, actually give the answer to this question. So it's a rhetorical question. Each soul course. Each soul course. That's also another rhetorical question that's in the poem. Then we have alliteration. Fly flags. These are similar consonant sounds beginning words that are close to each other. then which would. There are others like that. Then we also have repetition. That's repeating words, like the entire words, not even some or a part of it, for emphasis. In the poem, heaven on earth was repeated. Rage was also repeated. Then we have personification. Rage spreads toxic fumes. Rage sets sail. Rage spreads, rage sets. Rage is not human, but we are giving it human attributes. So that's personification. Then the rhyming scheme in the poem is alternates. We have the alternate rhyming scheme, where the first line rhymes with the third line, the second line rhymes with the fourth line, like that, like that. Now let's answer questions. So from the O3SCHOOLS JAMB app, I've pulled out a few questions from this topic, Radar of the Treasure Trove. Yes, you heard that right. On the O3SCHOOLS JAMB app, you can actually search for past questions based on the topic. Now look at the answers to these questions. The poem is a good example of dash. A, pastoral poetry. B, oral literature. C, didactic literature. And D, pastoral sonnets. Pastoral poetry has to do with, poetry about country life, about the simple country life. Then oral literature that is not written down, one of the earliest forms of literature to have existed. Then didactic literature has to do with instructing, lessons from it. Pastoral sonnet. A sonnet is simply a poem with 14 lines. So Radar of the Treasure Trove is a good example of didactic literature. The poem is instructing us about life, what you must do, what you must avoid, if you want to live a blissful life. Number 2, according to the poem, the ultimate goal of man's existence on earth is to live an ultimate life, work harder to be successful, bring joy to everyone around him, give to the poor. The answer will be C, bring joy to everyone around him. That should be what you should be striving for. The poetic device in the expression rage is chief is metaphor, simile, hyperbole, oxymoron. Here we have metaphor, a direct comparison, although the expression could also be personification because rage isn't human, but chief is an attribute of, human. So personification is not in the options though, so we go with metaphor. It is not simile. Simile has to do with the use of ice and like to compare unequal things. Then hyperbole is an over exaggeration, and oxymoron is the use of opposite words side by side in sentences. One lesson to learn from the Radar of the Treasure Trove is that we can choose the way we react to situations. Anger is good for the soul. Heaven is a place to experience after death, all of the above. Our answer becomes A. We can choose the way we react to situations. Because if you check, first, the poem says we should always strive to, fly flags of joy. So the poem thinks it's possible for you to be happy despite the situation you find yourself in. And then the poem also says we should watch our minds because as we think, so we feel. So the poem thinks it is really possible for you to choose the way you react. Anger is good for the soul, of course not. This is not a lesson to learn from the poem because the poem explicitly states the, adverse effects of rage, which is a synonym of anger. So anger is good for the soul, it's not a lesson. Then heaven is a place to experience after death, of course not. In the poem, heaven on earth is repeated at least like 2 times or so. So that means heaven is possible to experience here on earth, not just after death. The dominant theme in Lade Warsonu's Radar of the Treasure Trove is destructive impact of rage, advantages of rage, importance of rage, all of the above. Destructive impact of rage. The poem tells us that rage is capable of robbing us of life, robbing us of all things good, all of that. So the dominant theme is the destructive impact of rage. There are more questions in the O3SCHOOLS JAMB app on this topic that we've just treated. So do well to download the app and practice. Thank you for watching.